Have you ever written a perfectly normal Spring Boot API, tested it locally, everything looked fast, and then production happened? Suddenly the API is slow, database CPU goes crazy, and somehow your simple endpoint is firing hundreds of SQL queries. If that sounds familiar, you have probably hit the N+1 query problem. And honestly, almost every developer using Hibernate runs into this at some point. The good news is, once you understand it, fixing it is actually pretty straightforward. So in this video, let's break it down properly. Alright, imagine we have two entities, authors and books. Right? One author can have multiple books. Pretty straightforward setup. So now suppose we write this code. Right? This iterates the author and prints the books written by the author. Nothing suspicious, right? Looks completely fine. But here's what Hibernate does behind the scenes. First, Hibernate fetches all authors. Then inside the loop, every time we access books, Hibernate will fire another query to fetch the books written by that author. And this just keeps going. So if you have 100 authors, you end up with 101 queries. One query for authors plus 10 extra queries for books. That's the classic N+1 problem. Why this happens? The reason is because of lazy loading. By default, Hibernate tries to be smart. It delays loading child collections until they are actually needed, which is usually good. Because if we never access books, why load them from the database? That part makes sense. The problem starts when lazy loading happens inside loops. That's where performance gets wrecked. One easy way to detect this is to enable SQL logs. Once you enable the logs, watch your console. If you see the same query repeating over and over, you probably have an N+1 issue. Another clue is when APIs become slower as data grows. Now, how do we fix it? The classic solution is to use JOIN FETCH. This tells Hibernate, hey, load authors and books together in one query. So instead of firing queries in a loop, Hibernate performs a single join query. Much faster, much cleaner. But there is one catch. JOIN FETCH is powerful, but don't overuse it, especially with huge collections. Because massive joins can create duplicate rows and memory issues. Also, pagination with collection fetch joins can become messy. So there is another solution to this problem, and that uses something called entity graph. Now personally, for most Spring Boot projects, I prefer entity graph. It's cleaner, less verbose, and easier to maintain. You basically tell Hibernate, for this query, fetch books eagerly. That's it. No long JPL query needed. You don't need to specify the query. You just put the annotation and Hibernate will manage it. So which one should you use? My rule is, if you need complex queries, custom joins, precise SQL control, then go for JOIN FETCH. But for regular application code, and by default, I would prefer entity graph because it's much cleaner code. And please don't try to solve this by making everything eager. That usually creates even bigger performance problems later. A better approach is keep relationships lazy by default and fetch data intentionally when needed. So the N+1 query problem is basically a side effect of ORM abstraction. Hibernate is trying to help, but sometimes it ends up executing way more queries than we expect. The key thing is be intentional about fetching. That's really it. Once you start paying attention to generated SQL, you will avoid a huge percentage of JPA performance issues. Alright, that's it for this video. If you found this useful, subscribe for more Spring Boot and Backend engineering content. And if you have ever spent hours debugging Hibernate performance issues, trust me, you are definitely not alone. See you in the next one.